5 of our series on the angel of Jehovah, the angel of the Lord, the angel of God, Malach Yahweh. We're going to look today for how Malach Yahweh interacts with another person. Who is he? Balaam. Balaam. And we find that in the book of Numbers, starting in chapter 22. That runs, as I recall, from 22 through 25, the story that includes Balaam along the way. It's a bit of a long story. It's a story of the wilderness wanderings near the end when they are very close to preparing to enter across the Jordan. So in Numbers 22, we're going to have a description of Israel's advance along the east side of the Jordan River toward a spot opposite Jericho, where, of course, they will then cross. But in the process, there's a Moabite king named Balak, Balak, and he intended to stop Israel from using their land as a crossing point, as a point to go through to get to the crossing point, at least. And he wanted to do it by using, or he chose to do it at least, by using a prophet named Balaam. Was Balaam a prophet? Yes, but I call him a no good, money grubbing prophet. But when Balak attempted to use Balaam in that way, God intervened to discourage Balaam from doing anything what Balak had asked Balaam to do was to curse Israel, believing, of course, that the curse would have its effect. But God said, "No, Balaam, I don't think you're going to do that." And he never did directly, and no curse. In the middle of the episode, God gives Balaam permission to continue. We'll see that in verse 20 of chapter 22. But only speaking the words Yahweh would give him. He said, "You're not going to curse them, but you go with them and I'll tell you what to say and what to do." Well, Balaam went. And in verse 22, we find out that God's angry at him for going after he told him to go. Well, that's because Balaam had chosen, we believe, to not go along with God, but to use God as an excuse for going along. That makes Yahweh look inconsistent till you read all the way down to verse 32 and find that Balaam fully intended to find a way to curse Israel counter to what God had told him. A bit later, Malach Yahweh will appear in a threatening stance with a sword drawn. Not a pretty picture, but it's not the usual picture of how God deals with people by sending somebody with a sword. In fact, many even deny that God has any attribute that would permit such behavior. Of course, that's absurd because God has wrath and he can use whatever means he chooses because it will be consistent with his uh, attribute of justice. And remember, God's attributes don't clash with each other. So if God does something to carry out justice through his wrath, that is not incompatible with his being love. So, though you want to think about it, because the question I would ask you is, does this action or threat by Yahweh cause you to rethink your perception of Yahweh? Can you accept the fact that your God can deliver wrath, can deliver punishment, can deliver death when it's appropriate. What follows is a somewhat humorous account of Balaam and his donkey. This is in the middle of the story, but it is a rather interesting story. The donkey saw Malak, Yahweh, but Balaam did not. The donkey saw him, but the Balaam did not. So here you have a jackass that sees the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and the guy on the back of the donkey doesn't even see him. But the donkey attempts to avoid Malak Yahweh. But Balaam, since Balaam didn't see him, he didn't know what in the world the donkey was doing. He didn't know what was happening. He got ticked off and took his anger out on the donkey. Let's read it beginning in Numbers 22, chapter 22, verse 20. We'll read, I don't know, 8 verses maybe. God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men, and that's Balak's men, the Moabite men, if they've come to call you to go and curse Israel, that's understood that's why they would come and get him. Rise up and go with them, but only the words which I, Yahweh, speak to you shall you do. So Balaam packs up. He arose in the morning and he saddled his donkey and went with the leaders of Moab. But God was angry. He was ticked, really ticked, because Balaam, was going, and the angel of the Lord, Malak Yahweh, of course, took his stand in the way as an adversary against Balaam. Now, Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. So I'm not sure what these servants thought they saw or heard. When the donkey saw Malak Yahweh standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, now that's a threatening posture, the donkey turned off from the way and went into the field. So the donkey said, I ain't going there. But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back into the way. Then the angel of the Lord, Malak Yahweh, stood in a narrow path of the vineyards with a wall on this side and a wall on that side. In other words, Balaam and his donkey were in a narrow spot, and the angel of the Lord moves and gets in his way in that narrow spot. So he couldn't pass around him, apparently. When the donkey saw Malak Yahweh, she pressed herself to the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall. So what did he do? He struck her. And the angel of the Lord went further and stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn to the right or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam. Balaam's on top of her. She just lays down. So Balaam got angry and struck the donkey with his stick. Then Balaam and the donkey, this is the cool part, Balaam and this jackass strike up a conversation. And when you get through with the conversation, you wonder who the jackass really was. And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. So this is God working here. And she, the donkey, said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you struck me these 3 times? 3 times Balaam whomped on her with his stick, I guess, riding crop, whatever. Then Balaam said to the donkey, because you have made a mockery of me, if there had been a sword in my hand, I would have killed you. And the donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life to this day? She said, wait a minute, Balaam, think about it. Have I ever done this before? Have I ever been accustomed to do so to you? And he, that's Balaam, says, no. So she had him nailed, asked him a question. He had to give the only proper response. He said, no, you haven't done this before. This is, let me ask you a question. It's really a rabbit trail, if you please, or something along that lines. What were Balaam's two servants doing during these proceedings? We never hear anything about them, from them, or directed to them. Evidently, they didn't see Malach Yahweh. We don't know that, but there's no indication they did. I mean, after all, Balaam didn't see the Malach Yahweh, still hasn't. That's part yet to come. Did they hear the conversation between Balaam and his donkey? Or was that just simply an exchange between Balaam and the jackass, and that nobody else could hear it? And the conversation about to come up next were the two servants privy to what happens next, beginning in verse 31? The Lord opened Balaam's eyes now so that he could see the angel of Jehovah. He could see Malach Yahweh standing there with his sword in his hand. It's been drawn. It's ready for action. Beginning with verse 31 of chapter 22. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he, Balaam, saw Malach Yahweh standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. And he bowed all the way to the ground. Balaam knew, hey, wait a minute, I don't have a sword. Well, he did, though, didn't he? He threatened the donkey with it. But he bowed to this object that he saw, this object of his vision, that was Malach Yahweh. And the angel of the Lord, Malach Yahweh, said to him, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary. Ooh, Malach Yahweh says, I've come out as your opponent, Balaam, because your way was contrary, catch this, to God. No, it's not what he said. Malach Yahweh said, behold, I've come out as an adversary because your way was contrary to me. What does that tell you? But the donkey saw me, he continues, and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, I would surely have killed you just now and let her, the donkey, live. So what did the angel just tell Balaam? Look, if your donkey hadn't turned away, I was going to take your head off at the neck. Now, she saved you, because otherwise I was going to do you under. I'd let her alone. She didn't do anything, but you would have been dead. And again, what's happened? The angel explained that he would have killed Balaam if not for the donkey's actions. In that same verse, Balaam bowed in a pose of worship, or at least a pose of submission of some sort. Now, let me ask you this. If he was bowing in a form of worship, would an elect angel accept worship? I think not, because that's what Satan wanted. Angel worship would have been unacceptable to Yahweh. That's what got Satan booted out, right? Because he wanted worship. And God has never permitted worship of an angel. Not only that, God said, I don't give my glory to anyone, let alone discipline an angel. I won't give anybody, any other person, my glory. I won't share it. It's mine. It's only mine. If you look at Hebrews chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, you see a statement that's related to this idea, not to this event specifically, but to the idea of angels and worship. Hebrews 1, beginning in verse 5. For to which of the angels did God ever say, Thou art my son, today I have begotten thee? And those of you who've been with us for a while know that that's from Psalm 2, a statement about Jesus Christ. And then it continues. And again, and he's saying that to what angels did God ever say this? I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. Verse 6, and when he, gets God, again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, and let all the angels of God worship him. So what does this claim? That God said, when my son comes into the world in his state of incarnation, the angels are to worship my son, Jesus the Christ. Something that God said he would never permit of another individual. And leads you into a good theological question. I'll let you ask it of yourself. But there's another connection between Malach Yahweh and Jesus Christ. You just saw it, right? The connection is that Malach Yahweh sounds a lot like the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. We've been hinting at that with all of these interactions. Let's go back to Numbers 22, looking in verse 34. And Balaam said to Malach Yahweh, I have sinned, for I did not know that you were standing in the way against me. And he didn't, right? He couldn't see him. Now then, if it is displeasing to you, I will turn back. I won't keep on going. I won't go to the point of cursing Israel. I'll turn around and go back. 35. But the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, Balaam wants to be paying some attention now. Go with the men, but you shall speak only the word which God shall tell you. Again, I read it wrongly. Go with the men, Balaam, but you shall speak only the word which I shall tell you. So Balaam went along with the leaders of Balak. Again, he says, I'm the one who's going to be directing this, Balaam. And of course, that doesn't sound too angel-like. Angel-like behavior is obedient behavior doing the will of the one directing the behavior, not being the one who directs the behavior himself. Balaam evidently understood his predicament. He bowed. He knew that there was something beyond his ability to deal with. He admitted his sin in rejecting and beating the donkey mostly, when the donkey was doing what the donkey was told to do, and he offered to turn back. But the angel of the Lord told Balaam to continue rather than turn back, but again warns him to speak only what Malach Yahweh would tell him. Let's go Numbers 24. We'll skip ahead a couple chapters, starting in verse 10. Then Balak's anger burned against Balaam because Balaam was telling him, look, I can't curse him. God's after me. I can't do what God refuses to let me do. And he, Balak, struck his hands together, and Balak said to Balaam, I called you to curse my enemies, but behold, you have persisted in blessing them. These 3 times, not just once, 3 times. Verse 11, therefore flee to your place now. We said, get out of here, Balaam. I said I would honor you greatly, but behold, the Lord has held you back from honor. No, he didn't hold him back from honor. He held him back from pay. Verse 12, and Balaam said to Balak, did I not tell your messengers, whom you'd sent to me, saying, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything contrary to the command of Yahweh, either good or bad, of my own accord. I can't deal with that on my own. I can't do as I please. What the Lord speaks, that I will speak. He sounded like he's getting really religious now, but he's probably trying to keep feathers from being ruffled before he gets out of there. Balaam never did curse Israel, but he did give the Moabites an effective way to do their own dirty work. What was it? Very simple tactic. Entice the Israelite men with Moabite women and get the women to turn the men to the Moabite religion, the idolatrous religion of the Moabites. Get these guys to be idol worshippers. Numbers 25, next chapter, verses 1 through 3. While Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. There it is. Now they are doing exactly what Balaam told them would be the case. You get your good looking chicks out there, and the men will turn to them. They will turn the men then to the idols. For they, verse 2, for they, the Moabites, invited the people of Israel to sacrifices of their gods, turning them to idolatry. And the people of Israel ate and bowed down to the Moabite gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Moab? No, the Lord was angry against Israel, his own chosen people. What transpired was a plague that cost Israel 24,000 casualties at God's hand, not the hands of an enemy. This was God's doing that cost Israel 24,000 lives. Verse 4 of chapter 25, and the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders, this is after this is happening, after they'd turned and gone into the Moabite women and into the Moabite idols. Take all the leaders of the people, this is the Israelites, and execute them. Well, I'm not sure whether that's the people would be considered Israelites or Moabites. The people generally refers to non-Israelis, so it may be that he said, take all the leaders of the Moabites and execute them in broad daylight before me, the Lord, so that the first anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. And now in the next couple of verses, we're going to see a little bit more of this. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, and notice this is now talking about Israeli men, each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. So this is speaking of killing Israelite men, or Israeli men, if you prefer. Then behold, verse 6, one of the sons of Israel, one of the Israeli men, came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman. Actually, the Midianites were involved in this with Moab. In the sight of, and he did it in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel. So this was a blatant act that this character was trying to pull off with a Midianite woman. It's like bringing a Midianite woman home to your Jewish parents. And the people were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting, probably because of the 24,000 that had died already. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, this is Aaron's grandson Phinehas, and he is a priest, since he was of the line of Aaron, when he saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation and took a spear in his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through the body. So, so you would assume that that means that the man was in a sexual relationship with the woman, and Phinehas ran the spear through them both. It doesn't get that graphic, but that's the picture that I see. Rather than stabbing them both separately, I think he did it in one move. So the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. The minute Phinehas did this, put the spear through the two of these people, the plague stopped. And those who died in the plague were 24,000. We want to re-examine the later verses 28 on and note the references to the Lord and the angel of the Lord. I don't want to do it. I'd like you to do it. Go back in and see again how the term angel of the Lord, Malach Yahweh, and the Lord, Yahweh, how those terms seem to be interchanged. It's a point we've been trying to make also all along. So either in that case, there were two personalities present, Malach Yahweh on one hand, Yahweh on the other. Or Lord is a reference to the angel of the Lord, which would declare the angel of Yahweh to actually be Yahweh. Before we close, let us check part of the prophecy that Balaam did make. Do you ever remember Balaam making a prophecy? This is something that I like to do every Christmas season, and you may see the connection when I read verses 16 and 17 from Numbers 24. The oracle of Balaam, who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. So Balaam saying, I'm a worshiper of Yahweh. I'm a prophet of Yahweh. I know what Yahweh wants. I'm falling down on my face in worship, but my eyes are open. And here's what I see. This is what this preface in verse 16 was for. So in the first part of 17, he says, I see him, not now. In other words, this is future. I behold him, but not near. This is a ways away. A star, there you go, shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel. So you have a star coming out of Jacob, a star out of that tribe, and that star is a scepter. meaning a ruler with power or a king. So Balaam has just predicted a star connected with a king to come from the tribe of Jacob in particular. As you know, that star would rise representing one from Judah, one by the name of Jesus. His name, by the way, isn't Jesus Christ. His name is Jesus. His title is Christ. His name, if you wanted to, it would be Jesus Bar Yosef, Jesus, son of Joseph. As far as we know, he had no last name in the sense that we do. Uh, Care to venture when that prophecy was fulfilled, and when, and by whom? I'll let you worry about it. A star from Judah, representing a king to come from Judah. So in this session, this session particular, the one we've just looked at, we've seen more of the likely connections between Malach Yahweh, Yahweh, and Jesus the Christ. We have words given us by the author of Moses. The author continually makes these points for us. And Malach speaking as if he were God. Again, Malach Yahweh in these conversations seems to go between Malach Yahweh and Yahweh with no description of any change of actor. And so we're saying that Malach Yahweh is speaking as if he were God. So, who's next? Who are we going to look at? Well, in this case, not a single individual. We're going to look at the entire nation of Israel being confronted by Malach Yahweh. And in the process, we will show some interaction between one we believe to be Malach Yahweh and Joshua, the leader of Israel in the Promised Land.